I'm Hendrik, and I think what is different here for me is that this is only my master thesis, so I tried to have a very limited scope, and I'm really in the process of writing it, so I hope I structured it so you can understand, but I'll just try it. So maybe I'll start with a question. What do you think about trade unions? You maybe think of them as, well, important in the political process, important for redistribution of wealth and power and labor and wages. You maybe think of them as very important in the 70s and 80s and like a little bit into Marxism and too much into socialism. But you probably not think of them as very important environmental actors. Or basically, that's where I came from, and I was like, trade unions, interesting, but maybe not interesting for our cases and our stuff. And so this is really what I tried to do. I tried to look at the Austrian trade unions and try to understand what do they think of the energy sector and what are their positions with respect to energy. To really see in how far have they integrated environmental concerns and environmental issues in their policy statements, in their press releases and stuff like this. And maybe also see where the boundaries and where the obstacles to much more and far-reaching positions. So in the first step, I'm analyzing press statements and analyzing position statements with respect to the Austrian energy sector. And in the second step, I'm comparing this with environmental NGOs to see where the commonalities and the differences between the two actors. And the assumption behind that is that on the one hand you have trade unions, which are in Austria very important political players, and on the other hand you have environmental NGOs, which have this, so to say, wise knowledge of how to and what's important with respect to environmental issues. And bringing those together and maybe trying to see the overlapping importances and overlapping positions, and also see where the differences that could be very important if you think about social ecological transformation and how we could have an energy sector that's much more sustainable. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Did you get it? Or way too confused? Okay.
Okay. Questions? Very quick. Did you have also a historical approach about this issue? Like, how did the position of trade unions change over time in Austria?
I started to look at that. It's not in the center of what I do, but I looked at that, and what you see first is that the whole environmental issues just came up recently, so to say, within the policy documents, really in the groundwork, like the ground stuff from the trade unions. The whole energy sector was out for a lot of decades, also due to historical reasons. In Austria there was a huge fight in the 70s between environmental NGOs and the trade unions, actually on energy issues, so this is very interesting. But that's just a side note and more for the introduction, and I really focus on the last 7 years, 6 years, something like this.
What is the motivation of your research?
The motivation?
Why are you trying to see the commons and the differences between those two?
Change the world, probably. I mean, as I said, but that's specifically an Austrian situation. And trade unions are really important in the political process. So the idea behind is to say, if they're much more active with respect to environmental issues, those could be much more on the policy agenda or influencing, like, also the left-wing party, which is very close to the trade unions. So this is probably the motivation behind it.
So is there a point then to maybe find a really common space between the NGOs and trade unions, and maybe use the trade unions as a political sort of advocates for something which might be common space for the two?
But not only use them, but also maybe redefine some of the problems and some of the discussions. So right now, in the trade unions documents, you always find like environment is always a cost. It's always something problematic to the production process and maybe to growth. And we also want to redefine this understanding. Maybe. It was good.
Thank you very much.